My wife, Daisy, and our daughter, Luna, left me when I was diagnosed with advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma. Years later, they returned with plans to take over my house, but that's jumping ahead. Let me start from the beginning. It all began when I received the diagnosis. It came as a shock. I had always lived an active, healthy life, kept up with my annual checkups, and watched my diet closely. The oncologist couldn't explain why I got cancer, but he said the chances of surviving it through aggressive treatment were slim. Still, I resolved to fight. The news was hard to deliver. My wife of 15 years and our teenage daughter were devastated. I did my best to reassure them that I would fight with everything I had, but there was a worry gnawing at me. The doctor had warned that many marriages don't survive the strain of cancer treatment, and I feared the toll it would take on our family. That night, I sat with Daisy, expressing my concerns. She promised to stand by me, to help me through this, no matter what. We had a solid financial cushion, good insurance, savings, and a trust fund my late grandfather had left me. Our house was paid off, and I had set aside money for Luna's college fund in case the worst happened. A week later, chemotherapy began. It was far worse than I could have imagined. The treatment drained me completely. Some days, I could barely manage to eat or move. Daisy and Luna took on everything. They handled meals, chores, drives to the hospital, and refilled my prescriptions. I tried to help, but I often couldn't muster the energy. The first 2 months were the hardest. I started noticing a shift in Daisy and Luna's attitude. They grew more distant, less willing to help. It began with small things. Requests for a glass of water or a little assistance moving around were met with reluctance. I felt the strain growing. The turning point came when I had an early chemo appointment one morning. I was already running late and couldn't find Daisy. When I called her, she said, "Take an Uber." "I'm too tired." I was stunned. Still, I called an Uber, also informing the hospital that I would be going alone. The driver was kind enough to make sure I arrived safely and even offered to take me home after the treatment. When I got home, I could hardly keep my frustration in check. I confronted Daisy and Luna about the tension I'd been feeling. I asked them point blank if they felt I was a burden. Daisy sighed and admitted she was overwhelmed. Luna, in a small voice, said she hadn't expected me to be so needy. I suggested we bring in a nurse a few days a week to help with the physical side of things, so they didn't have to do everything. It was clear I couldn't manage much on my own. To my relief, they agreed, and I arranged for a nurse to come. The nurse who arrived was professional, kind, and efficient. She never missed a chemo appointment, and she made sure I had the proper care. My health improved, and doctors were pleased with my progress. Still, there was a noticeable shift in Daisy's demeanor. She started to act as though the nurse was replacing her. I told Daisy that if she was willing to take on the nurse's responsibilities, driving me to chemo, ensuring I took my medication, handling my meals, we could let the nurse go. The only reason I had a nurse was because she wasn't able to provide that level of support. Reluctantly, she agreed but asked if we could find a male nurse. I explained that the hospital's recommendation list didn't include any male nurses with experience in oncology, and I had chosen this nurse because of her experience and understanding of my needs. Daisy didn't like that the nurse was there, but she agreed to the arrangement, albeit begrudgingly. A few days later, she snapped at me, accusing me of making my illness everyone else's problem. I tried to explain how difficult the chemotherapy had been on my body, but it only seemed to frustrate her more. She stormed off, slamming doors. I let her go, knowing her anger would only hinder my recovery. That night, my mother-in-law called. She was upset that I had hired a woman to help me, even though I was still married to her daughter. I explained that I needed help, and I had brought in a professional nurse because Daisy couldn't manage everything on her own. I assured her it was temporary, just until my treatment was over. She wasn't convinced but eventually stopped pressing the issue. For a week, things seemed to calm down. My treatment was progressing, and I was feeling a bit better. Then, after a chemo session, I returned home to find a moving truck in front of the house. Daisy and Luna had packed their things and were leaving to stay with her mother. It crushed me. I was too tired to say much, but the timing felt cruel, right after a chemo session when I had no energy to argue or even express how hurt I was. I turned to Luna, hoping for some clarity. She was old enough to make her own decisions. She looked at me and said she didn't want to live with me anymore. It was too hard. It was a gut punch. Watching them leave, I felt abandoned and unwanted. In the midst of all this, my brother stepped in. He saw the nurse spending extra time with me and asked if I had any family who could help. though he lived 3 hours away. He offered to take time off to stay with me until I could find someone more permanent. When he arrived, he was furious about Daisy's actions, calling her selfish and ungrateful. He reminded me that Daisy had never worked since we married and that I'd always made sure she had everything she needed. Since my brother could only stay a week, he came up with another plan. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a tough divorce and needed a place to stay. She was studying radiology on scholarship at a nearby university, and my home was closer to the campus. It seemed like a good solution. Kara could help with emergencies, and she'd have a safe place to stay while dealing with her personal struggles. I agreed, assuring my brother that Kara wouldn't have to pay rent. I didn't mind. After all, my wife and daughter had taken most of the belongings. Kara was kind and agreed to help out, promising to clean up after herself and be considerate. Kara arrived the day my brother left. The next few weeks went smoothly. She handled grocery shopping, cleaning, and even helped with meal prep, all without complaint. I missed my wife and daughter, but it was clear they weren't interested in checking in. As time passed, Kara proved to be an invaluable help, and my health continued to improve. About a month and a half after Daisy and Luna left, I received the best news I could have hoped for. I was cancer-free. Update: moving forward, I've made my decision. I'm going to take them up on the offer and move on. Although I've always had an attachment to the house, the memories here are too painful. It's time for a fresh start in something smaller, somewhere I can heal. My wife doesn't know yet, but I'm planning to give the house to Kara. She was there for me when I needed it the most, kind and understanding even when we barely knew each other. If she wants, she can sell it. I no longer have any use for the place, especially if it means my wife or daughter might claim it. I've found a quiet spot in the countryside, a peaceful neighborhood where I'm looking forward to starting over. Update number 1. Hey, wife and daughter. It's been more than a year since my diagnosis, and I'm settling into my new home. The neighborhood is full of friendly people, and I've made a good friend in Sophia, my neighbor across the street. She's a widow with grown kids who visit only for the holidays. Sophia invited me to her porch for drinks, and we got to talking. She shared her story of losing her husband to lung cancer, emphasizing how important life insurance had been for her family's stability. I opened up about the situation with you both. Surprisingly, I still haven't heard from you, and I've come to terms with that. I've been filling my time with hobbies like woodworking, and I'm slowly building up a collection of tools. One day, after returning from the hardware store, Sophia told me she saw a couple of people hanging around my old house. They didn't do anything malicious, just knocked on the door, wandered around the yard, and waited in their car. She almost called the sheriff but decided against it, thinking they might be family. When I asked her to describe them, her description matched you both. I have no idea how you found my new place, considering only my brother and his wife know where I'm living. I can't help but wonder why you're showing up now. Almost a year later, after leaving without a word, Sophia said she'd handle it if you came back. Frankly, I have no desire to engage with you, especially after how you left me when I was at my lowest. Later, I called my brother. He told me you'd been harassing Kara and her roommate at my old house. Luckily, Kara had made it clear that the house was now hers, and she even had proof of the transfer. I felt terrible that she had to deal with this because of you, so I called her to apologize. Hopefully, I can put an end to this nonsense soon. As for you, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the divorce was final months ago. My lawyer sent the papers to your mother's house, but maybe you mistook it for junk mail. Either way, I no longer care. We are done. Update number 2. You showed up at my house again, but this time it was in the middle of the day. I was working when I heard the knock, so I checked the security cameras. Sure enough, there you were. My ex-wife looked just as I remembered, and Luna had grown into a young woman. I stayed inside, as planned, moving closer to the door to hear you better. Sophia, always the good neighbor, went over to greet you. You asked if she knew a man named Charlie who used to live here. Sophia was confused by your wording and asked what you meant by used to. You then explained that your husband, no longer ex-husband, in your mind, had lived here before he passed away after an extended hospital stay. My jaw hit the floor. As far as I knew, there was no record of my death anywhere, certainly not at the hospital where I was treated. You insisted that you were the next of kin and implied that the house was rightfully yours. Sophia let you know that Charlie, me, had been a divorcee and had told her about filing for a unilateral divorce. She added that, as far as she knew, I planned to leave everything to charity since I had no other family but my brother. She found it strange to see two women snooping around my house. The conversation fell silent, and Sophia asked if you had a death certificate or will. You said no. Sophia explained that if you had those documents, you could take them to the county office and transfer the deed. You didn't like that suggestion at all. You screamed at her, accusing her of sticking her nose in your business and demanding she stay out of it. I felt humiliated. My neighbors had been nothing but kind, and here you were, making a scene. Part of me wanted to confront you, but I stuck to the plan. Sophia apologized and explained she was only trying to help. She returned home, and you both left soon after. Afterward, I went to Sophia's to apologize for the whole ordeal. She brushed it off, saying she found your behavior repulsive but somewhat amusing in its absurdity. I couldn't bring myself to laugh, knowing how angry you could get when upset. If you ever come back, I'm ready to confront you and demand that you leave me in peace. You came back again yesterday. I was working in my home office when I heard a loud crash. Rushing to the living room, I found my front window shattered, and people were outside screaming. It was you. Of course, my neighbors were trying to stop you from causing more damage. You and Luna had bats and had already broken several of my potted plants. I grabbed you by the arm, shocked at your audacity, and told both of you to leave my property before I called the police. To my surprise, the neighbors had already made the call. You were taken away in handcuffs, and I felt no sympathy for you. I had everything on camera, including the moment you smashed my window. The police had it all. Afterward, I cleaned up the glass and rigged up a tarp to keep out the elements. Sophia gave me some buckets for my plants until I can replace the pots. I did some digging to figure out why you came back. Apparently, your mother passed away 2 months ago, and you learned that the house you've been staying in wasn't even in your name. It belonged to your ex-husband's cousin, who decided to sell it. With both your parents gone, you and Luna sold off most of their belongings and had been living in a motel. When you saw Kara at the house, you assumed I had died and came snooping around for my assets. You're now facing charges for vandalism, attempted break-in, and assault. Luna, being a minor, will do community service. As for you, you're facing jail time. As this was premeditated, I'm considering a restraining order as well. At least for now, I won't have to worry about you anymore.